As you all know, the Homeless Services Reform Act requires we provide an opportunity at the beginning of each meeting for public comment so that members of the public may comment on matters that is relevant to the work of the ICH. And so with that, we will start the public comment period. There is a microphone to my left by the exit door. Those that wish to make comments, please make your way to the microphone at this time. Good afternoon.
My name is Jim. I'll be still resident for the people. Synthetic drugs are destroying the lives of people who face housing instability. As a member of the People for Fairness Coalition, how can we assist the homeless in ending that cycle of addiction?
Well, thank you for having this critically important meeting. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll speak for the poorest little girls and the poorest little boys and the poorest young people and the poorest families here in Ward 8 in the city. And committee, you've heard it before, on ending homelessness, movement on ending homelessness, meeting to end homelessness, and report on ending homelessness. Commission on the poor, the commission on poverty, and my faith with Jesus. Then American people need jobs. Americans should be first. Jobs for Washington residents. Washington residents need jobs. Poor people need jobs. Homeless people need jobs. And veterans need jobs too. And please forgive me for not saying, number one, our wonderful Heavenly Father. Number two, His Son, our Savior. Number three, the amazing Holy Ghost. And number four, angel of the Lord. And once again, number one, our wonderful Heavenly Father. Number two, $4 trillion team. Number three, let there be light. And number four, $4 billion plan. A couple years ago in Ward 8, we had Chancellor Henderson, Trayon White, and Marion Barry. And then I heard 42% not graduating, 13% proficient in reading, and 9% proficient in math. And this year, in 2015, 52% of the African Americans did not graduate. 28% of the European Americans did not graduate. We, as African Americans, we should be ashamed of ourselves. We've become the president and the first lady. We're the attorney general. And when Obama first got elected, John Conyers was the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. And yet and still here in Washington, D.C., we cannot help these young people from first grade to 12th grade to graduate from high school. So anyway, and also, please not forgetting, on Tuesday, August 13th, had a very, very disgusting, degrading, dehumanizing, demoralizing experience with the Department of Human Services. And then the 1st November, very disgusting, degrading, dehumanizing, demoralizing experience with the Department of Human Services. And because I was poor, because I was homeless, wasn't nothing done about it. And you got people sitting at this table, been sitting at that table too long. They won't call the Attorney General's office. They won't call the U.S. Attorney, riding the backs of young people, riding the backs of poor people. Sadly to say, no, riding the backs of young people, riding the backs of poor people, riding the backs of homeless people. Sadly to say, riding the backs of sick people, and that's pitiful, riding the backs of low-income senior citizens, and riding the backs of poor and homeless veterans. At the last ICH meeting, Mr. Young was here, Ms. Marshall wasn't here. I find that amazing. You didn't take off from you're the city administrator, you're here, and she wasn't here at the last meeting. This is a perfect example. Some of these people have been in these positions too long, and because of homeless people, they have a job. So may God and Jesus be with the senior citizen homeless ladies out there today. They need help today, this week, And this month, I'll end by saying the same old thing I always said: Secretary's Office, Department of Health and Human Services, the Surgeon General's Office, Director's Office of the National Institute of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the Public Health Service, and the President's Council on Physical Fitness, Sports, Nutrition. I've been saying this for the last 4 years, but because I'm poor, because I was homeless, no one pays attention to me. But thank you, Mr. Rashad Young, for allowing me to speak. May God and Jesus be with you, sir. And I truly hope by the end of the year, we don't have 50% not graduating. This is disgusting. I don't see how you can work in the Wilson building. This has been going on for too long, but thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Any additional public comments? Okay, seeing none, we're going to take a slight deviation from our agenda while we await for the mayor's arrival. Kristy Greenwalt's we're going to go to item number 5, which is the strategic plan implementation update, and I'll turn that over to Kristy.
Thank you, Mr. City Administrator. So there's a couple of documents that I want to refer folks to in their packets of materials today. There's a implementation dashboard and a quarterly implementation update. As we're moving to this appropriate place. So as folks know, we launched Homeward DC on March 31st of this year, so we've had about 5 months with regard to implementation. I think everyone around this table and all of our partners in the audience know there's a tremendous amount of work underway that we are trying to both ensure that we are communicating the volume of work, both so folks have an understanding of what's happening in different parts of the system and can plug into those efforts as appropriate, but just so folks, I think, also have an appreciation of all the work underway. I think one of the things that we talked about at the last executive committee meeting last month was that folks are actually struggling with the volume of work right now. We are actually trying to move every part of our system at the same time. So that's both the good news and the challenging news. But we did want to make sure that we were providing a way to sort of capturing where the activity is really focused right now. So one of the things that we created was sort of an implementation dashboard to help folks understand where our energy as a community is really focused. It's, as I mentioned, the Homeward DC outlines 20 different action items in Chapter 5, and since we started, we've added a number of additional action items. And it's not possible to have everything be high priority and to be investing the same amount of energy across the spectrum. So the dashboard that's in front of you is designed to show folks where our energy and resources are focused over the last 5 months. So the items that are in green are really where the items that we have identified as high priority items and where our team's resources and staff time are really focused. The items in yellow are things that we have launched and are underway, and the items that are in red are things that really have not commenced yet but will be kicking off in the months ahead. The other thing that I wanted to make sure that I pointed out to folks that we're not going to go into a lot of detail today, but we wanted to make sure that we actually provided sort of in narrative form some of the highlights of the things that have been happening over the last 5 months. We're, of course, going to get into more detail on some of those things today around all of the changes happening in the family system. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking to you about that, but I did want to highlight a couple of other things because, again, I think folks will see that there are actions across the system. It's not just the Department of Human Services, it's the Department of Behavioral Health, it's the Housing Authority, it's DHCD. All of our partners are working extremely hard right now. So there's a couple things I just wanted to point out. At our last meeting in July, we spent some time talking about our veterans goal. Everyone, I think, knows that we have a goal to end homelessness among veterans by the end of this year. So by the end of December 2015, we have a goal to end homelessness among veterans. This is in alignment with the goals that the federal government has laid out. And I'm happy to say that we're making tremendous progress as a community on this goal. And quite honestly, we're pointed to by a lot of our partners in the field as sort of as one of the models in the country for the work that's happening here in the district. So over the last few months, we've done a tremendous amount of work to really clean up our data and really focus in. We have a single by name registry, so we know every veteran that has touched our system. We know where they're at, whether they've been assessed using our common assessment tool, the VI SPDAT. We're working very hard to engage those folks, match them to a housing resource, and get them moved into housing. So the team meets, the strategy team is meeting every other week. We're meeting twice a week to match folks to a housing resource. And we know that we need to achieve our goal by the end of this year. We have to move 68 veterans into housing every month. So that includes everyone that is in our system today, and it also accounts for any inflow that we have coming into our system every month.
Oh, Kristy, I'm sorry. 1 second. There is a Ford that is parked, DC license plate DC 8696. We need you to move your vehicle now. If you have a Ford that is parked near this building, DC license plate 8696. If that is your vehicle and you are in this room, we need you to move that vehicle now. No one got up. DC 8696, Ford. Thank you.
So back to veterans. So
Back to veterans, thank you.
all right. So again, so we know we need to house 68 veterans a month through December to meet this goal of ending veteran homelessness in the district. The good news is that we have largely been exceeding that, and of course it varies every month. But over the last 4 months, folks can see 2 of the months we significantly exceeded that rate, and 2 of the months we're hovering right around that rate. So this is good news. This is exciting for our community. This is really the first opportunity we've had as a community to test this by name registry and really focus on. We know everyone by name, and we have a process, and we can move folks into housing. The closer we get to zero, it becomes tougher, right? So one of the things that we're noticing, folks that have been in our system for a long time and are quite entrenched, we're having to really look at how we operate, how we engage them, how we work with them. So the Veterans Now team has really been, again, meeting every week to really look at our strategies and how we can innovate and try new things to reach this group of veterans.
Housing or transitional or?
So this is all veterans that are housed. So it's with a resource from the district. So or a federal subsidy. So it's our VASH or PSHP, a rapid rehousing at the SSVF.
Are they taking with the input of veterans taking the available housing off the market? Doesn't that greatly affect the housing opportunities for the rest of the input of singles and families?
Well, so that's a great question and a great segue into the next point. So one of the things, as I was saying, as we're really ramping up our work under Homeward DC, we realize as we're out there looking for units for veterans, for chronically homeless individuals, for families, we're largely talking to the same group of landlords, and so we need to be working together across populations, across agencies, and across systems. So one of the things that we've done in the last month, really in the last 4 to 6 weeks, is to launch this landlord working group. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. It's described here on the narrative, but the purpose is really to describe or to come up with common marketing materials to make sure that when we're reaching out to landlords, that we're doing it in a way where we're describing our programs in the same way, we're using the same terminology, that we're not competing with one another. And so that's it, and it's working quite well. Another strategy around the landlord outreach with our partners at DCHA, we've been launching what we call meet and lease events. So our meet and lease events, we're reaching out to landlords so that we can have a pool of pre-inspected units. And so we bring in veterans on the day of the event so that they can literally go out and see a unit within this pre-inspected pool, or many units, choose a unit, and we can match them up to that unit and move them in on the day of. So that really cuts out a lot of the back and forth when we have folks out in the market, with a voucher in hand, but have difficulty getting out to see units and navigating that market on their own. So this allows us, to really help facilitate that process and build the bridges with our landlords, but again, to really move folks in on the spot.
Mike, since you were complaining about the delay with the inspections and these units being pre-inspected, or how you work with Consumer Regulatory Affairs. I guess that's the agency responsible for inspections, or
The Housing Authority.
they already pre-inspected.
So they've all been inspected to our qualifications, so the residents can move right in.
Okay.
Right, so another thing that the group has been working on is the development of written protocol to really institutionalize the work that we're doing, because we know that when we reach this goal in December, we have to then maintain it and bring it to scale for other populations. So a lot of the things we're learning, particularly around the meet and lease events, the landlord outreach, the work we're doing to identify, assess, engage, match folks to resources, all that work needs to be brought to scale throughout the system for other populations, whether it's single adults that are not veterans, chronically homeless individuals, transition age adults, all populations. So we're working on developing written protocol to make sure that we are institutionalizing what we're learning within the veterans portion of the system. And I already mentioned the last part that we're continuing to test new ways to engage the population. We have folks going out to our low barrier shelters almost every morning. We're doing special outreach events and breakfasts, different activities to really engage this population, working with, again, our partners at Catholic Charities, the Community Partnership, DHS, really everyone around the table. It's an all hands on deck effort. A couple other highlights over the last several months. The youth subcommittee has been doing a tremendous amount of work. We've borrowed a strategy from the adult system, something that's required by the federal government, but in most communities around the country really only have started working on the development or implementation of a coordinated entry system within their adult system. And so in DC, we've launched this same process in our youth system, and the goal is to really create a system that can be very easily navigated by our youth. So it's not really incumbent upon the youth to go to every provider in search of services, but that we can, wherever they enter our system, we can assess them and quickly get them connected to available resources that best meet their needs. So the youth serving agencies have been working on implementing a system of coordinated entry. This is also really improving the data that we have about the needs of youth and where we have gaps in our system. The youth community also launched a comprehensive census. This is very similar to our point-in-time count that folks know that we do in January across our system. But the point-in-time count hasn't traditionally been a good tool to really catch unaccompanied youth. So the youth census was wrapped up on the 25th. The community partnership is in the process of cleaning the data. And again, all of this will serve as the building blocks to develop a youth strategic plan, sort of piggybacking on the work that we did to develop Homer DC earlier this year. We'll have a youth version of the plan at the end of this year. One last thing, of course, the director of the Department of Housing and Community Development and her team have released a RFP earlier this summer to get the $100 million of housing production trust funds on the street. This, of course, is also a huge part of the Homer DC plan as we move from a shelter-based system to a housing-based system. That production pipeline will be hugely important to our efforts moving forward. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to the city administrator.
The show board and everybody that's been involved with the homeless program has been doing a great job. But from what I hear and the work I do with veterans I come in contact, the SSBF is housing, but they're going out the back door because there's not enough preventive funds out there. I don't know, maybe this may be a good segue for you, Muriel Bowser, to see if there's some money can be placed in the budget for prevention funds for veterans that are, placed into housing under the SSVF, which is the Supportive Service for Veterans and Their Family Program. Once they either lose their job or some type of crisis, they're going back out the back door. So it looks good number-wise, we're housing all these vets, but they're coming right back around in the cycle, vicious cycle, because there's not enough prevention funds available for the veterans, and really for any people that we're housed that's not getting so much some type of assistance in the housing program. So it's like we're looking good publicly, we're housing all these people, but then they, 3, 6, 9 months, they come right back out the back door.
So Donald, that's a really good point. And we talked about this a little bit at the last quarterly meeting, and definitely committed to using our data to understand what's happening in our system. When I talk about how many folks we have to house every month and the certain amount of inflow we have into the system, that does include any recidivism. Right now, our data is showing that the recidivism rate actually is not very, we have very good housing stability among the folks that we're placing in housing, but we are tracking that, and I think as we get closer to zero, we will be able to shift more of those rapid rehousing resources into prevention and continue to move upstream so we can catch people even sooner.
Yeah, I don't mean to be putting you on the spot, but I deal with this every day, and I'm asked to where to send individuals that need preventive funds, and of course we want to, show our worth of housing people, but when the people come to me and I send them to the different organizations that are supposed to be in the community, all district assisted, and there are no funds, so we're starting almost back over again. And I'd like to see if we can either come up with some reserve funds or emergency funds to, once we did the hard work of housing these individuals, whether they be vets or non-vets, we could get them more stable, because we'll be battling this same problem. And I know that employment, making sure that those that can work, work, and those that need to receive the benefits either through SSI, SSDI, or so forth, can get the benefits, because it's such a backlog and it's a long time of getting those benefits. Those folks are coming back out of the housing also. So.
Well, Donald, thank you for that. And I think you know that we support not only in word but in deed, but in how we are funding our program to focus on housing first and make sure that that housing first model is supported by assistance, and that we have the right organizations and people with proven techniques and strategies working on that assistance as well. So part of what we will talk about, and I know that my team is working on, is making sure that the new monies that we have put in this budget starting in October not only are talking about putting people in housing first, but to your point, making sure that once we have them there and stable, that they have the assistance that they need. Okay, I wanted to answer, but I got you. All right.
Thank you, Doc. We're going to transition back to item number 3 on our agenda, which is the Fresh Start to End Family Homelessness. Our plan calls for significant changes to the homeless delivery system. And with respect to the family system, 2 of the biggest things that we're focused on are, 1, closing DC General and replacing that with smaller service-focused facilities throughout our city, and 2, transitioning to year-round access to shelter. And so the mayor has challenged us to move aggressively on those 2 fronts and develop strategies, both legislative and administrative, that advance that right now and move that right now today. And so the mayor was kind enough to join our council meeting today to introduce and talk about those strategies. And so without further ado, as she's already indicated, we're focused and put a lot of resources, time, and effort in there, and she's certainly leading the charge So without further ado, I turn it over to our Mayor, Muriel Bowser.
Well, thank you,
Bowser.
Mr. City Administrator, and greetings to everyone who's here. And let me thank you in advance. So this is, everybody can hear? Can you hear back there? Thank you in advance for the hard work that has already gone into the Homeward DC plan. You can see a considerable amount of talent and energy around this table of people focused like I am, and I dare say like the majority of the people of the District of Columbia in a goal that we have, and that is how to end homelessness in the District of Columbia. So I want to thank all of the members of the Bowser Administration Cabinet who are part of this council and bring that focus and energy to this work every single day. I also like to thank the representatives of the Continuum of Care who provide service in the community every single day, and to folks who are working in all walks of life, advocating for the needs of our homeless neighbors every single day. And I too want to thank everybody who brings a personal experience to how to end homelessness in DC to these discussions as well. So we know, and I know that you spent a lot of time on the Homeward DC plan. It's ambitious, but it's achievable. I think we all start this conversation, and sometimes when we talk about homelessness, it seems so big and so insurmountable. The fact is, we can quantify the challenge that we have in the District of Columbia, and if we can quantify it and we can add the will of the people of the district, their elected officials, we can solve the problem of homelessness in our city. We know, and our commitment is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring in Washington, D.C. We set out this bold vision talking to people from all across the District of Columbia, and I will tell you what I'm struck by. No matter where people live, or no matter what their station in life, if they're very wealthy or if they don't have much, they all believe that a city as prosperous as ours should and must solve the problem of homelessness in our city. We really set out with a huge goal and a big ask. Quite frankly, I went in to my first budget session. I think Rashad was probably, 60 days old in the administration, and Laura too, and many others. So I said, we have to close the $200 million gap. That's what we inherited on day one, and we closed it. But at the same time, we had to live up to a lot of promises that we made that are right. And part of those promises were how we deal with family homelessness and close DC General and make sure we reflect that commitment in everything that we do. So in the 2016 budget, we proposed and we won historic and unprecedented investments in ending homelessness in Washington, D.C. We pledged, and I want to thank the members of the council for their support, because it was also a very big lift for the council while we were trying to close budgets. But let me talk about it a little bit. We pledged $145 million for locally funded homelessness assistance, including a $23 million down payment on the first year of implementing the strategic plan. We had a very robust conversation about the strategic plan in how we would work back from the goals we set, ending chronic homelessness, family homelessness, and ending homelessness for veterans. And what would it take? I asked them for the plan and said, how many dollars is it going to take for us to be able to achieve it? I think we came up with the number. We knew we couldn't bite it off in a single year, so we looked at a schedule of years of how we could meet our commitments. We also wanted to make sure we were very clear about our focus and what our system was, could be, and what our system isn't and should not be. So we want to focus on emergency shelter and emergency housing that is just that, for emergencies. And it's very important that as we talk about our system, that we talk about how we make sure we have enough emergency housing for people who are experiencing emergencies. We want to have systematic, consistent funding for affordable housing. You heard that discussion already. We have to invest. This is what developers in the nonprofit and for-profit world tell me each and every day. We can plan and we can do more to produce and preserve more affordable housing in the district if we can count on the city consistently each and every year to support us. So I'm very pleased, and I want to acknowledge Director Polly Donaldson, who is here. She's hosting us today, but she is also responsible for a very serious commitment that we have to investing in affordable housing in the District of Columbia to ensure that we have a consistent pipeline for years to come. And already Polly has stepped up to the plate and advertised $100 million that the city will invest in the upcoming years in affordable housing. And she's going to do that this year, in addition to helping to spend down $75 million that was sitting there when we got here. She's going to have to do it next year, too, and the year after that. So let's thank her in advance for her hard work. And I am very grateful that we can talk about unprecedented investments in ending homelessness, which is one part, making sure that we have access to emergency housing, but also making investments in permanent, quality, affordable housing in every ward in the District of Columbia. So I'm here today to talk about our systems and changes that we will need to make to ensure that homelessness is indeed rare, brief, and non-recurring in the district. So achieving these goals requires having a system of care that can prevent homelessness whenever possible and provide safety and shelter to those who need it when they need it, with the services and supports that makes shelter stay short and a one-time occurrence for people and families. So over the past 8 months, we have made some key changes to create this system, including providing year-round access to family shelter, not as a right, but as a matter of good public policy. So I'm going to ask one of our fearless leaders in this charge, Director Laura Zeilinger, to walk us through several legislative and administrative measures that my team will pursue to make sure we can achieve the goals we share together. And then I'm going to ask you for some more help. I know you've helped already putting these plans together. We're going to talk about some changes that we need. And then we're going to talk about the work we need to do together to bring our entire community along. This is what I know. Homelessness isn't just a downtown problem, isn't it? Is it? It's not just a Ward 8 problem. It's not just a veterans problem. It's not just a family problem. It's an issue that we have to confront as all Washingtonians in all parts of the city. So, Laura, you want to take us through the changes?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As those of you who have been involved in developing the plan are well aware, and as Kristy talked about, is in the beginning section on our performance, a really important part of achieving our goals is really looking critically at the crisis response system for families. And so we have been hard at work at that over the last several months since the adoption of the plan, really looking at the front door of where families come when they're seeking help with homeless services at the Virginia Williams Family Resource Center. We have gone ahead and launched new initiatives to prevent family homelessness. We have recently awarded 4 grants, all of which will be up. Grantees will be up and running and administering services over the next several weeks. This will allow us to really serve more families without them having to continue to come into Virginia Williams until they end up in the homeless system. We know that more than 45% of the families who enter shelter come in seeking help while they still have a place they can stay at least for a little while before they come into the system. And we have not had a lot to be able to offer them to meaningfully support them with challenges that they're undergoing that are at the root of homelessness, whether it's conflict with family members, whether it's other economic issues. And those are opportunities that and engagements that are really important. So what we will be able to do is really be able to work with prevention providers in the community so that instead of advising families, we're sorry you're not eligible for shelter today, but should your situation get worse, please call us or come back. We'll be able to say, we're glad that you have a place you can stay tonight. We understand how tenuous your situation is. We're going to be able to connect you with this provider in the community who will continue to work with you to try to help solve your situation of homelessness. We're also developing clear standards around eligibility. It's clear that there are some things around how we determine residency, how we understand who's part of a family unit, how we even understand what it means for somebody to have a safe place to live that have a lot of gray area in the way that we've been administering our eligibility at the front door. And as the volume of families increases coming in, that creates even a more problematic way of doing eligibility. So we've been working with legal advocates, with a number of stakeholders, as well as the eligibility staff who sit at Virginia Williams to really hash out much clearer standards that we'll be able to use on eligibility. The next part is a lot of what the mayor talked about, which is what happens when people experience a housing crisis. They don't have other options and they need to come into shelter. We know that DC General is not the way that we think that families should have to experience homelessness. That is, we want them to be in the community in smaller facilities where the environment there reflects that these are people we care about and we value in the community. They're not just where we could find a place, a building where we could put people out of the elements. And so we are working very hard on a strategy to be able to provide small community-based shelters that are generally not more than 50 families in any particular building, with services on site to support families to exit. And we want to be able to provide access to that support year-round, because we know that people don't experience homelessness because it's cold out. They experience homelessness because of other tragedies going on in their lives, and we don't want their situations to get worse while they wait for it to get cold enough that they can come into the system. We know at the Department of Human Services when we need to meet a year's worth of need in 5 or 6 months out of the year, that we don't do our best work and we become very overwhelmed. So we think we can serve families better if we can get in through policy changes where we can normalize the entries and exits into our system. Now, we've been doing this. We've been testing this out, and since the end of hypothermia season, so that when there are families who we understand have no other safe place that they can be and would otherwise likely to be in shelter, they have been coming into the shelter system. So just some comparison for you. In 2014, between April and August, there were 7 families who came into the shelter system. And this year, we have had 290 families enter family shelter. Now, last year, during that same period in 2014, 311 families exited homelessness. And this year, 433 families have exited homelessness. So we are certainly serving a lot more families. We are also exiting a lot more families. We also have a lot more families that are in the system and will be at the beginning of hypothermia season than we had last year. But we think that this is, again, an important way of making sure that we're serving people in crisis, and it also tells us that if we can continue to improve exits to permanent housing, we can continue to get to a place where the system can meet the demand by the numbers of people who are coming in and exiting the system. Part of the way that we do that, though, is looking at also is the exits, and we've already talked about things that we're doing there in terms of the investments in affordable housing. We have taken a good hard look at our rapid rehousing program. That FRSP is the acronym of the name of that program, We have done a redraft of the program rules, looking at policies where we have ceased rental assistance for families in certain situations where they have then shown back up at the front door of the homeless system, and revisited those policies to try to support families who still with short to medium term help can get the support they need to stay in housing. And part of the way we're doing that is through a progressive engagement approach, whereas that when families are exiting, they're exiting with the lightest touch of assistance, but as needed, we're able to bring in deeper and longer term supports when warranted to support their success in the program. And the new investments in 2016 in targeted affordable housing, in more permanent supportive housing, will allow us to do that even more successfully, and our program rules will be in place to support that. So these are some of the major ways that we've been looking at how families come in, what is their experience when they're in shelter, and how we support them to exit into the permanent housing of the type that is appropriate to their needs to be successful in housing in the community. In order to achieve the systems change, we've also looked at two areas where we've determined we need some legislative changes. And so we intend to work with council on two legislative proposals. One of them is around as we looked at how we do eligibility, and I've sat in on a number of intakes with families in the eligibility process, and I'll tell you it is very difficult in a short session, sitting one-on-one or two-on-one where we have our teaming approach with a family to really determine fully understand their situation, and always determine if shelter is actually an appropriate placement at that time. There are situations where it's entirely clear, and especially when people are fleeing domestic violence situations, or they sometimes are coming to us from the domestic violence system where there's no question about eligibility for shelter. But there are often times, especially given the very young age of about 48% of the households coming into our system who are parents under the age of 24, where there might be issues going on in other positive relationships with adults in those people's lives, where with some time and some support, we can help people stay in the community and still get the supports they need to attain their own permanent housing in the long run without having to come into the shelter system to do so. So we will be able to use the prevention contracts or prevention grants that I talked about earlier to support that. But we need a little bit more time in the eligibility process to explore when is shelter an appropriate placement and when might it not necessarily be in the best interest of a family. And so we are proposing to be able to do something called interim eligibility, where we don't want to, oftentimes it's just unclear whether if shelter is appropriate. We don't want to risk that people are going back to an unsafe situation while we're working with them to make that determination. We want to be able to bring them into safety while we continue and intensify our engagement with that family. And then, so this allows us to be able to place families in shelter or in overflow shelter in a motel, as the case may be, and work with them. And our hope is to be able to complete this process in about 3 days' time, with the opportunity, as needed, to renew that time period up to 3 times. So the maximum that a family would be in an interim placement, we believe, would be 12 days, and at the end of which we would make the determination, if we hadn't made it sooner, as to whether we would make a permanent placement an official placement into the shelter system or not. There would be a due process clause in this, where if in case we are not making the right call, that families would be able to appeal. We see very few appeals around eligibility right now in our administrative process. We usually see them more around terminations from programs, but we will build in a specific due process that will allow an expedited process to really, using the standards that we've developed around the eligibility, to really ensure that we have a place where we're both protecting and balancing the safety of families, and also doing more front-end work on when shelter is appropriate. This will allow us to make shelter available to people who need it when they need it, because we will be able to identify ways to help families earlier on, or in other ways when that's appropriate too. So we do need a legislative change in order to be able to do this, because currently the only way that a family would exit a placement with us is through a termination, and that's we want to be able to make that determination when it's not a punitive measure. The second piece is around the DC General replacement strategy. In order to, within the budget that we have, and to replace the units at DC General with small community-based shelters, we would like to be able to place families either in private rooms, as were defined in the Dignity Act as part of the HSRA, or an apartment-style shelter. Currently, the law requires us to put families in apartment-style shelter unless that is not available, and then we may use private rooms. We think that we can provide quality, dignified, warm environments for families to stay in a short term with a private room and without it having to be a full apartment. When we look at our length of stay data in the district as well as in other jurisdictions across the country, we see that we have faster exits when there are private rooms. And I'm not making a comment about the motivation of families or making shelter unbearable so that families want to leave, but it's set up to be something temporary where we support families to exit, not where families come in to live. And we think we can provide them an environment where they're very well supported and comfortable and safe, and also have the ability to exit quickly. We've been working on this concept with DGS, and we brought some drawings for people to walk by and take a look at. I know you can't see them from where you're sitting now at the end of the meeting, just if you're curious what something like this might look like. You can think of this not as this is a prototype of what we're going to do at every single shelter, but I want you to sort of see what it would look like to have a floor where there are 8 to 10 rooms, where sometimes 2 rooms would share one bathroom facility. There's some people who would need to have a special accommodation. They might have their own bathroom off of their room. There's in each floor there's some common space with quiet areas where children can do homework and other play space. There would be outdoor recreational facilities. So we're thinking about what are the needs of children of different ages, of families, and how do we create an environment to meet those needs, and for shelter to serve the purpose that shelter is intended to, because we're making the investments in the housing for people to be able to exit and live in housing with the way that we hope everyone will be able to, with their own kitchens and their own full facilities that a family would have. So we brought this just as a way of saying we think that this could work. This is it's one idea of what it might look like, and because we want to make sure that we're being transparent, that we think it in our attention to be able to explore as part of the DC General replacement strategy, having facilities that have private rooms. We are asking for a legislative change that makes it clear that that is something that we could do. We are not proposing to remove all apartment-style shelter from our inventory. We understand that that's something that people need, and reasonable accommodations to have. We want to be able to continue to offer it. But when we look at the scale of the number of units we're trying to replace, the budget that we have, and our data, we think that this is a strategic and important way to move forward. So, and we would be asking, so that is the second legislative provision. We realize that these are things that are important for the public to weigh in on. And so we are in the middle of a process of talking about these ideas, how they would work, what they would look like. If you could turn to the next slide. We've done a number of things to do this. So we are using Homeward DC as our guiding strategy. Nothing that I've said in terms of what we're doing around the systems change should sound too surprising. Could someone switch to the next slide? Oh, they're working on it. Okay. We've had 2 listening sessions over the last several months on what our policies should look like around shelter eligibility and year-round access, around changes to the rapid rehousing program. We've had a number of meetings and conversations one-on-one and in small groups with different stakeholders and advocates about the things that we're thinking about. We've shared our work plan around year-round access through a number of ICH meetings, both the strategic planning and the executive committee summer meetings, And as we sit here together, the mayor has been previewing with you before we would propose to introduce it to the council. We will hold a public listening session on the proposed changes on Friday, September 11th, and we will put information out through the ICH so that people, we invite you to attend, and we will continue to hold meetings. And again, our intention in all of this is to be open, transparent, get people's ideas, but also to move with urgency. We have a lot of urgency around what it's going to take to close DC General and wanting to move quickly on that, around being able to sustain our ability to provide year-round access to families and really do the work on all aspects of the system. And certainly our intentions are to make this a collaborative process and not one that we're doing unilaterally. So our next steps in this would again be a listening session and on September 11th from 9 to 11. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you, Laura. I want to thank Laura for walking through the changes. And I know that you are all very interested in especially the points that she outlined about making our system a true crisis response system for families, and us making the investments that we need to make that happen. And we wanted to come to this meeting first to talk about the legislative changes that we need to make, both to transform our system into a crisis response system, but to also be able to move towards closing DC General. Also glad that Laura spent some time talking about the outreach that has been conducted to this point, and I want to thank you for your participation, because I know that these proposals have been informed by Laura and Kristy's discussions with the stakeholders around the table. We've also had the opportunity to talk to our colleagues on the council to give them an advance notice that we'll need them to turn their attention to these matters when they return from recess. So that's where we are, and I previewed before I stopped talking a request that I have of you. I'm not sure if everybody has this, but I am going to ask you to help us spread the word. And before you leave, ask you to sign a pledge to end homelessness in Washington. I also want to ask each of you to think about your own communities and neighborhoods, maybe contacting your ANC commissioner, contacting your Citizens Advisory Board or your neighborhood association, and ask each commission to endorse the pledge as a whole. Who can do that? Can anybody do that? Willing to do that? Okay. So we may have all the ANCs represented at this meeting. So we can get it done. So basically, we're asking people to sign on to this commitment and to these principles. First, homelessness in DC is not an intractable problem. It can be solved. When members of our community experience homelessness, we all suffer. Our entire community must be a part of the solution. Third, every neighborhood and every resident has a stake in preventing homelessness and supporting people who experience homelessness. Fourth, by committing to action and using proven strategies, the District of Columbia has an opportunity to lead the nation in ending homelessness. And finally, as a community, we should close and replace DC General with smaller, more dignified, private room emergency housing for families across the district. So that's the pledge that we would like everybody not only to sign today, but commit to carrying this message to your advisory neighborhood commission and asking the commission as a whole to endorse this pledge. And we would really like you to get it done in September. And can we count on you to do that? Just need you to, we'll make sure you get an email. You can forward it to the chair of your ANC. Ask them to put it on their September agenda for a vote. That's what we have. Thank you, Mr. City Administrator.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I have a question, Mayor. Community family issues is very important. I've been personally working on it for 50 years. But with the population of the singles who are also getting older within the city, I'm trying to see how we're going to attack that issue, because I know, and you know, there's not enough housing in the city to, and say if we lower the population of CCNV, 801, New York Avenue, what are the plans for CCNV? What are the plans for New York Avenue? What are the plans for 801, which you took in those numbers itself? That's over close to 2,000 singles. Because we barely have a problem getting the people out of the motels.
Right. So I think you know that Homeward DC certainly focuses on families, but it focuses on the entire population. And I think you also know that the $145 million that I talked about, plus the capital spend that we're going to make on emergency housing, some of it is for emergencies like I just talked about. A big section of it also is an investment in permanent supportive housing. So this plan, while I spent a lot of time talking about it today because we need to make some changes around the rules for family housing, emergency housing, the Homeward DC plan that we've invested in and part of the plan that you'll discuss and vote on today is for the whole population.
So thank you for, I'm sorry,
Is there any
Scott.
opportunity for questions? Or?
Sure, let's take a couple.
Just, the ICH hasn't seen the actual legislative proposals. This is the first time we've heard about any real level of detail about these. Frankly, they sound very similar to things that have been proposed in prior times where we were feeling a lot of pressure on family homelessness. And the devil really is in the details about these things. We've scrutinized these types of proposals in the past. They tend to fall apart, it's not necessarily being as effective as they had intended. I'm wondering if 2 weeks is really enough time to meaningfully vet this legislation, probe the weak points.
Oh no, the legislation
the
legislation will go through the regular process.
But before it's introduced, I'm wondering if 2 weeks is really enough time for the community to have a significant amount of input into something as significant as what you're proposing.
Well, you can talk about the input that we've already gotten, but
We haven't seen it. We haven't read it.
okay, you can read it, and you can read it through the normal process as well. But Laura, you want to talk about?
So I want to just be clear that we are hoping to be able to that the legislative changes are actually they're not expansive, and all of the details around how we implement are not part of the legislation. We want DHS to have the authority to be able to have families in safety while we complete eligibility. So what it actually does is it actually enhances services because it allows us to provide a placement to a family while we complete a process that we're otherwise trying to complete in a very short amount of time. Some of the things that need broad and robust discussion that we have actually begun to have with people around how do we have a standard where it's really clear. Those are things we have been in hours and hours of meetings ironing out and identifying scenarios of how these things get applied. And we would in policy talk about questions that I know have come up in the past, which is how long should a family be able to stay somewhere before it's determined that they're not eligible for shelter if they've come into an interim placement. And then how do we make sure if they're connected, for example, to prevention resources, if that situation falls apart, that they don't have to repeat the whole eligibility process, but because they're still receiving services through us or through our community partners, that we can bring them immediately into shelter without having to start over. Those are all things that we've begun to talk about, are open to talking about, but we will, this is new for the district, and we don't need to put that, and nor is our intention to put that level of detail into the law, only our ability to provide the safety of a place to stay for people while we engage in this process. And we will create policies around those things that we can continue to share data on and revisit and improve upon together. But I think where a little bit of the disconnect is we haven't, those are things I know that people feel very passionately about and we want to have engagement on. We are not going to put them into the law.
I mean, the clients care very much about protections.
As
What
do
due
we.
process means.
Yes.
Different things to different people, and legal standards, etc. And what's a safe and appropriate place to mean different things to the families and different things to other people. And understanding all of that and getting that community input, I think, is a key part of making this really work the way it's intended. Again, I'm just not sure 2 weeks before you produce it is enough, and I'm actually not sure the council process is necessarily the best way to
Speak up,
get that kind of
microphone or something.
All right, so there was just more questions about the input process. And what I also don't want us to lose sight on is what we have presented as a package of changes. And part of Laura didn't spend a lot of time talking about our ability to offer services throughout the year with the hope that we'll serve families throughout the year. The department has more time, the family has more time, and it is our great hope that the demand for services during the winter will be lessened because people are getting services when they need it. Let me also not give short shrift to what we have embarked on that is a huge undertaking, and that's finding 250 units across the city to replace DC General. So when I talk about those two things and the changes that we need, they go hand in hand. They go together. And so if we want to be able to achieve those things, we have to be open to making some changes to how the system is currently working, which I think we all can agree is not serving the residents of the District of Columbia well. So that's just kind of where we are. Laura's going to have at DHS, or I don't know where it's going to be held.
We need a little bit of a larger space.
A larger space.
So we'll find out where.
There'll be additional sessions there, and then we just look forward to working together hand in hand. But I hope everybody approaches the discussion with some urgency. I think we always like more time to do things, but the time is now. So if we can all approach any feedback that we have with some urgency, I think we'll all be better off. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
So certainly as we move forward in this process, whether it's the legislative process or discussions that DHS will facilitate outside of that, there certainly is room for, and we encourage input and discussion into these proposals, both the legislative piece and the operational administrative things. So we're certainly open to hearing other discussions, and we want the best system that we can, that can be well executed and well implemented. And so we encourage folks to take time to read through the legislation when that legislation is delivered to the council, and certainly give us your input on the ideas that you've heard and seen here as we move forward. The next item on our agenda is a discussion around the winter plan. We want to talk about the winter plan, both changes from fiscal year 15 and an overview of where we're headed. The HSRA mandates that by September 1st, a plan is in place for how those who are homeless are going to be protected from cold weather injury, and the Emergency Response and Shelter Operations Committee has the development on the lead of that strategy. And so in contrast to Homeward DC, which is a strategic plan, our winter plan is an operational plan. It's an operational instrument. And most importantly, it talks about and provides projections on the number of individuals and families that will need shelter throughout the winter season, and talks about how we, in fact, will meet the needs of those individuals. And also talks about how services like transportation, meals, and mental health will be coordinated and delivered to protect clients from the elements during hypothermia and to try to prevent hypothermia deaths and cold weather injury. This is an item that requires a vote by the ICH, and so after the discussion and presentation and any questions, we will ask for a motion and a vote on the winter plan. And so with that, let me start with Kristy to lead us in that discussion.
Sure, thank you. As the city administrator said, this plan is very different than the broader strategic plan, Homeward DC, which is, of course, our plan to transform our entire homeless services system. As folks that have been around the table before know, the winter plan is really an operational strategy and to help us prevent anyone experiencing homelessness from hypothermia or cold weather injury. And so, again, many of you have been through this before. Much of it looks the same, but we're getting better at it every year, and we continue to improve our strategy and our response and bring additional resources to the table, which, again, will really help our ability to serve folks experiencing homelessness and again, prevent cold weather injury. Because I don't want to talk at you the entire meeting, I've asked Kate Coventry, who is a member of the Emergency Response and Shelter Operations Committee, to help us walk through the strategy. We're going to touch on some of the highlights. We're not going to go through every single part of the plan in detail. Again, every agency and every partner around the table has an important role in the winter plan. Michelle Williams, who's the Family Services Administrator at the Department of Human Services, co-chairs the Emergency Response and Shelter Operations Committee, and will jump in as well on any questions folks have or any additional detail we need to provide. Just wanted to start out very quickly with high-level process overview on how we develop the winter plan. Again, the URSO committee has the responsibility for developing the plan. So every year after the winter season ends, we take the time to do public debriefs on both operations with regard to the family system as well as the single system. The community partnership plays a huge role in that debrief as they're poring over the data and really helping us analyze what happened and how things played out throughout the season. There's a work group of the URSO committee, the Shelter Capacity Work Group, who is also really looking at shelter utilization and trend data and sort of what's happening in the environment to help us identify or come up with estimates for how much shelter we expect to need throughout the winter. And so the capacity estimates that are in the plan are not what we need on November 1st, but what we think will be needed at the peak of the season. So the Shelter Capacity Work Group has done that work, and Kate and others played a huge role in that. We held 2 public feedback sessions, one at Martin Luther King Library, really focused more on operations on the single side of the system, and one at DC General for operations on the family side of the system. We brought the draft strategy and some of the issues we were struggling with to the executive committee last month to work through some of the sort of last remaining details that the committee was struggling with. And then we presented the final draft to the URSO committee just a couple of weeks ago. So I do want to note the draft that got sent out to all of you last Tuesday, there are a couple minor typos and edits that we will point out as we're walking through, all very minor, a missing word or 311 when it should say 911. I mean, that's actually very important. But so we will fix those. So just know that the draft you have in your hand will be updated with those few little things, and we'll get the final, if and when approved by this body, posted on the ICH website and other appropriate websites. So with that, Kate's going to walk us through.
Hi, I'm here today in Jill Carmichael, our co-chair's stead, and I work at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. So just a little bit about hypothermia. Hypothermia seasons from November 1st through March 31st, but a hypothermia alert can be called before that time if the weather is forecasted or is below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, including the wind chill. Of the 151 days in the 2014-2015 season, 103 hypothermia alerts were called. That's a rate of 68%. I don't think any of us are surprised after the very cold winter that we had. So this is just a little bit about how a hypothermia alert is called. the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, HCEMA, and meteorologists at the National Weather Service in Sterling, Virginia, determine the real-time conditions and then the likely conditions for the next 24 hours. The alert is called if actual or forecasted temperature, including wind chill, is or will be 32 degrees or below. HCEMA and DHS, the Department of Human Services, continue to monitor the National Weather Service forecast throughout the day by about 2:30 to 3 p.m. each day based on the real time and the forecasted conditions. HCEMA and DHS determine whether an overnight alert needs to be called. That means that hypothermia shelters will be open from the evening until 6:59 a.m. the next morning. And then before 7 a.m. each day, HCEMA and DHS determine whether a daytime alert should be called beginning at 7 a.m. Battery, so we have a new policy this year. DHS will also call an overnight hypothermia alert when the temperature is forecasted to be 40 degrees or below and the forecasted chance of precipitation is 50% or greater. You'll see a little note at the bottom of the slide about the typo in the plan that will be corrected in the version that's posted to the website. Next, we estimated shelter capacity needs. We look at a lot of data for this, but it's not an exact science. That's all right.
I gotta get the slides.
Yeah.
We can send the slides out.
Paper.
There we go.
So what we look at is we look at the previous shelter usage for the past 3 years. We look at environmental factors like how's the economy doing? Are we expecting any kind of shifts? And we look at policy changes. Like on the family side, we looked at our new prevention effort that we have planned, for example. The estimates provided in the plan, and there's a lot of confusion every year about this, this is the number that we need at the peak. At the night where the most people are in shelter, how many people are in shelter, and then how are we going to make sure all those folks are sheltered safely? So it's not necessarily the number on the first night. In fact, usually it's not. We usually peak much more in the middle of the season. So about 1,600 beds for men, about 486 beds for women, and 721 units for families. So some of this, especially on the family side, some of this capacity will be phased in throughout the season, and we will expand as needed. There are 4 kinds of shelters for singles. Low barrier shelters operate year-round. Seasonal shelters open beginning the first night an alert is called through the end of the season, March 31st. Hypothermia alert shelters open only on nights when an alert has been called. Sites and rec centers open at 9. Sites and churches and other community-based buildings open at 7. And then overflow shelters only operate when all other shelters are near capacity. These are the men's shelter location. I'm not going to go through each one. But we do want to note that St. Luke's is being replaced by the Salvation Army.
Oh, this it's in Columbia Heights, and we're pointing that out because this was actually one of the typos in the plan as well.
These are the women's shelters locations. Open Door and John Young will be moving into a new building in January, and so that will impact the transportation schedules. Overflow sites are, as I said, are only opened as capacity at the other shelters is reached. Each site will start with an initial capacity of 50. Once that's reached, DHS will open a second site. The overflow sites are not listed in your winter plan, but they are on this one-page sheet. And the reason why they're on the one-page sheet and not on the plan is we don't want people to accidentally go to these shelters when they're not open. Because when they're not open, there might not be any staff to help people call the hotline or to get other arrangements. So that's why we want people to know where they are. And we did review this list of sites in the URSO committee, but we don't put it in the plan to prevent that from happening. So for families, Monday through Thursday from 8:30 to 4, families should go to the Virginia Williams Resource Center. After 4 on Monday through Thursday, all Fridays, weekends, holidays, and the day the DC government is closed, i.e. likely it might be snowing, you should call the DC Shelter Hotline. DC General Family Shelter and motels under contract will serve as primary placements for this coming winter. All family shelter, including DC General and overflow motel placements, will operate 24 hours a day.
So street outreach is an important part of our work under the winter plan to make sure that folks that are in unsheltered locations can be engaged and brought in safely in from the elements. We're very fortunate in the coming year that we will be able to expand street outreach significantly. Both the Department of Human Services has put out an RFA for additional street outreach, but the Department of Behavioral Health has significant resources coming in, a $9 million 3-year CABI grant, which is cooperative agreement for the benefit of homeless individuals. So we're very excited about those resources, which will really help us expand coverage across the jurisdiction or across the district, every jurisdiction, and to make sure that we are operating at full scale when the hypothermia season hits, so that we're in the planning stages for those resources right now, and we expect those resources to roll out in the fall.
Do we have Metropolitan Police Department on board, so in case we meet individuals with mental health or some type of issue that they won't come into the cold, and we can either FP12 them or somehow get, take them against their wishes, that's what we've been doing the last couple of winters, so that we can stay F3.
Yep, the Department of Behavioral Health has really the lead on that, but the police department officers do also serve in that capacity as an officer agent. So, if it's in the middle of the night and the mobile crisis team is not on the street, we can engage MPD in the case of an emergency.
So 9 vans are being added in the coming year to decrease wait times. A few of those vans will be replacing vans that are falling apart. So we're still working on how many numbers of vans are going to be on at which times of day.
That's another caveat I want to get in, because we discussed this, the wait time in some of the larger shelters, and when you got the 25 passenger vans, and they, depending on the weather, the traffic, you have an individual standing out in these elements waiting for the vans. And, we've been having this problem for the last 2 or 3 winters about getting larger vans. They holler about budget. Since we got money so far in the budget for a homeless situation, that we should be able to get larger vans. That way we can cut down on the wait time, cut down on the population, traffic-wise, it would, work twofold.
Right.
Plus make Mayor Bowser look good,
Right.
So Michelle kind of
So,
does that.
Mr. Brooks, so that certainly was part of it, and we are getting larger vehicles. The other thing that will help decrease wait times is the frequency of vehicles and how frequently they come around. So the expansion will, we think, overall reduce wait times. I mean, traffic we can't, but we'll get more vehicles on the road and some larger ones, so that where we have a lot of people, we're getting them moved out quicker.
Okay, thank you.
And they also include vehicles that are accessible for persons with disabilities.
Yeah, because that's another issue.
Yep.
That you have to call special time for,
Yep.
So the routes and for the transportation from the shelters and to the shelters is in the winter plan. I suggest everyone take a look at that rather than us trying to go through the whole route. The routes will change midwinter because of the opening of the new women's shelter, and an update will be posted on the ICH website. On-demand transportation is provided only before and after timeframes for scheduled transportation.
Okay, with regard to minors, so again, as I mentioned earlier, the youth serving agencies in the district through the ICH Youth Subcommittee have been doing a tremendous amount of work to really both improve the data that we have to understand the needs of this population and where we have gaps in our system. So as we've done the winter plan the last several years, We've really struggled because, we know that there's a lot of need on the ground, but our data doesn't always accurately reflect it. So we're trying to refine our data to really better understand what's happening. As we've been implementing youth coordinated entry that we talked about earlier, youth really, anyone who's seeking services could walk into any of our youth serving agencies, but we really created a no wrong door approach. But in the case of an emergency, if someone encounters a youth, or if the shelter hotline is called and UPO encounters a youth, the best way to connect them to our youth serving system is really to contact the DC Runaway and Homeless Youth Hotline, which is operated by Sasha Bruce. Okay. As listed on the slide, that we're really working hard to continue to build capacity in this part of our system. Last winter, we had added 12 additional transitional housing units specifically targeted to LGBTQ youth. DHS is currently in the process of making awards for approximately 30 additional beds for this population. And we also have another $500,000 in the FY16 budget targeted to pregnant and parenting teens, which we know is a gap in our system right now. And we're working on the best way to use those resources, but DHS has been moving with urgency on that, so we hope that as soon as those resources become available, we will be able to roll out the programming associated with those resources.
So for the numbers.
Debbie, it is, right? Yep. Okay, and as mentioned, again, we're really working to improve our understanding of the needs and the gaps in our system. Last year, the shelter capacity work group that Kate referenced started tracking these beds, which they hadn't previously been. They'd really been focused on the capacity in the adult system. So we're tracking the capacity in the youth beds as part of our weekly process, and the work group is reviewing that data monthly to understand where we have capacity, where we don't, what's the turnaway data look like, and what's happening in that part of the system. Again, we referenced the youth coordinated entry system, which is really helping us make matches throughout the system. So it's, again, not about the youth having to go to every single provider, but we are working as a network of providers and can connect them to any vacancies throughout the system. And also prioritize. Part of that is prioritizing when we do have limited resources. Is the youth presenting someone that actually has a safe place to stay, and another youth that's presenting has nowhere safe to stay, so we can make sure that we're making an appropriate placement decision. So the youth coordinated entry system helps us with all of that. I mentioned the census, which was recently completed, and again, this will help us figure out where we have those gaps in the system. A question around overflow for youth. Transition age youth who are ages 18 to 24 can always access the adult system if we're in a situation where we don't have enough beds within the targeted youth system. The question that we wrestle with is around unaccompanied minors. We don't have as much capacity in that part of our system, and folks that have been around this table for a number of years, I think, will remember some of the conversations around this particular issue. There is a limit to how long an unaccompanied minor can be in the system. So what we're seeing as we're looking at our data, these beds do turn over more frequently. That doesn't mean we have enough of what we need, but as we've been making placements through a coordinated entry system, it's really that 18 to 24-year-old group where we're struggling more than the unaccompanied minors. So often we're able to reunite them with their family or another relative, or in some cases it's a CFSA referral. But we are very concerned about making sure that we always have a contingency plan in place. And so with the leadership of the Department of Human Services, we're working with our youth serving agencies to really look at where we do have some flexibility so that if someone did present at 10 o'clock at night and it just was clear we were not going to be able to sort of untangle that situation before they needed somewhere to rest or sleep, that we would have the ability to look throughout our youth system and make sure that they had a safe place to stay, and that our providers have the equipment and resources that they need to make that happen.
And then this is just a list of the other elements that are in the plan if you want more information. I'm not going to go through all of them since we're running a little short on time. I'd just like to thank all the people who helped out in the development of the plan. I'd like to particularly thank the Department of Human Services, who always has a lot of work to do around the winter plan, and the community partnership, of course.
Is there a mic?
Cheryl, you can use the mic on the table. There you go.
Well, anyway, thank you. I've been at this table for, matter of fact, the past 10 years. And I have struggled with this down through the years, trying to make sure that the council and the mayor and even the people on the Hill understand what this means to saving someone's life during the wintertime. I read this 3 times. I am truly impressed with the work that's been put in here. It's plain, it's common sense. This can save someone's life this winter. I feel so. What I'd like to do and am going to do is make 100 copies, and I'm going to the parks, and I'm going to give this out. And I suggest everyone in the room, please try to do that. Save someone's life. Thank you.
Ms. Cheryl, based on those comments, I'm going to ask if you would be willing to make the motion to approve the winter plan.
All right, so moved.
I move the winter plan.
So moved. Yeah.
Adopted. Is there a second to that motion? It is properly moved in second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. The winter plan is adopted. Thank you. Let me just take a moment to echo those comments as well. This is, I've been in 5 jurisdictions, and so I've worked with the issue of homelessness for a long time in a lot of different areas, and this is the most comprehensive and robust set of procedures that I've seen and been a part of. So hats off to all of you and certainly our agencies that have worked hard and all the partners that have worked hard to refine this over the years and put this in place. And I think the comments are well said, that this does have the ability certainly to save people's lives this winter, so that's fantastic. Good work. We are right at about 3:30, and so we've gone through the strategic plan implementation update, and so at the interest of time, I'm going to move to our adjournment. All right? So thank you all. We're adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
We now return to our previously scheduled program, already in progress.